Hi there and welcome to Power Play. I'm Vashi Kapelos in Ottawa on this Wednesday. Tonight, high-level huddle in the nation's capital.
It's good to go around and talk. Talk is cheap. Let's start seeing action now. Let's start moving on these large infrastructure projects right across our country.
All 13 provincial and territorial leaders arrive in Ottawa for 2 days of talks, with the economy and trade expected, of course, to take center stage. Prime Minister Mark Carney is set to meet the premiers tonight for dinner and formally in meetings tomorrow. So what's going to come out of those discussions? We're going to bring you the latest on that in moments. Then
we need to be very much present in countries around the world so that we are able to truly diversify.
We're going to go one-on-one with Saskatchewan's Premier Scott Moe, who just got back from a trade trip to China, led by the Prime Minister. That's coming up, plus premiers on Polyev.
I'm really focused on Ontario. We're having our convention the same time they are.
It's not something that I've been focused on.
My view would be you'd see a strong mandate.
Conservative premiers weigh in on the leadership review of their federal counterpart, who will face a vote this week on whether members of his own party want him to remain on as leaders. Our front bench will be here to look ahead to Pierre Poilievre's leadership vote. Sharon Carr, Laura D'Angelo, Jamie Ellerton, and Sebastian Skamsky will join me just a little bit later on in the show. First, though,
I'm feeling positive. Compared to last year, with the government basically falling, Trump just got sworn in, he was attacking us, and we were all, at the time, the whole world's kissing his backside. But now we know President Trump's rules.
Nothing is the same anymore with our relationship with the U.S., with what's happening in the United States right now.
If we are going to determine our destiny and become that leader in that middle power space, it is going to take us making those tough decisions, having those discussions like we'll have today.
Canada's premiers have descended on Ottawa for a 2-day huddle, as you can see there. They're meeting today on their own, with a working dinner scheduled with Prime Minister Mark Carney this evening, and some separate meetings between the Prime Minister and select premiers throughout the day. All premiers will meet with Carney tomorrow. The economy, affordability, and trade all high on the agenda. The premiers are, rhetorically at least, presenting a united front, especially two provincial leaders who have been at odds lately.
We don't always agree on everything, but I think we've got a really solid base to start on.
The tone was very civil in the meeting and borderline friendly.
BC Premier David Eby and Alberta Premier Danielle Smith have butted heads over a potential pipeline to the West Coast, but you can see they're all smiles today when they sat down with the Prime Minister. Two other premiers who have clashed somewhat lately are Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe and Ontario Premier Doug Ford. Moe joined the Prime Minister's recent trade trip to China, which landed a win for the canola industry but drew the ire of Ford. Canada will allow 49,000 Chinese electric vehicles into the country in exchange for about a year of relief on agricultural tariffs. I spoke with Premier Moe here in studio earlier today. Hi, Premier Moe. It's great to see you. Thank you so much for making the time, and it's great to see you here in studio.
Great to see you, Bessie.
I appreciate it. I wanted to start off on the agreement overall with China, in particular the portion of the agreement that offers agricultural relief. Right now, that relief is time-stamped until the end of 2026. I know you've characterized this as a quote-unquote big win. Is that really a big win?
No, I think it is. And at first, I would just say this is from an agricultural perspective, whether it's canola or pulses or even the seafood that we see in the beef. It's a restoration of some of the trade that we traditionally have done with China, and in the the new environment that we have in trade negotiations around the world, there is a lot of uncertainty, and I think this provides some certainty for a period of time and the opportunity then to move beyond that. And the third thing I would just say with that is I think it really points to the fact of this restoration of trade, as well as where we go from here, engagement, in-market engagement around the world by all levels of government and industries is so crucially important.
I understand a restoration of trade, but like you said, like it's until, provides some certainty until the end of this year, whereas on our end, we appeared to have provided more certainty than just till the end of 2026 with restoring what was back in 2023 in the EV market. Is it your understanding that more concessions will be necessary to extend that relief beyond 2026, and is that really a good idea?
No, I don't think so. I think there's opportunities actually for us to not only start engaging on extending what is a solid agreement in the restoration of an agricultural market for Canadian goods in China, but actually to build on that into some other products, maybe in the energy space as well.
What does that mean? You don't think you're going to have to, Canada will have to offer anything else in order to get, like, if that were the case, why don't we already have relief beyond the end of 2026?
This is a step. Step in a broader trade relationship, I believe, and it's restoring some of the trade that we had. It's not it's not the end of the race by any stretch, but I don't think that's going to be true in any of the trade negotiations that we see in, today's day. It's fundamentally changed from the broad monthly, yearly negotiations, signing with a multi-country, multi-sector trade deal. Now what we are into is a new environment, I believe, around the world where you are, signing much more specific trade agreements with various countries, and that's why, one, we need to be in market, and two, we need to take the steps when they're available.
Do you think that's going to be the case with CUSMA?
I won't preclude what that will look like. I would say that the CUSMA agreement we have is one of the most beneficial trade agreements in the world to all of the parties that are signatories to it. It would be my hope that it would continue and maybe be reviewed to some degree, like it should be as times change. But it would be my true hope that that would be able to continue because of the benefit to all of North America.
So do you think that Canada should take the approach of sector by sector sort of trade agreements as you've described we have pursued with China? Or would you rather, for example, with India, as the federal government has indicated, there be efforts to reach a broad free trade agreement?
If we can get to a broad free trade agreement, and we just did see India, I think, take steps towards that with the European Union. If we can get to that, that's great. If we are unable to get to that, I think we need to look at taking the steps sector by sector with various countries that we can. And again, if you're not in a market, if you're not having those discussions with virtually all countries around the world, you're not actually able to take those initial steps or get to that broader agreement. So the goal and the golden standard is that free trade agreement, multi-sector, potentially multi-country, like CUSMA. But in the absence of that, and there is much absence to that in today's day and age, we need to be in that market negotiating those specific sectors that are important to our economy.
Let me make a more specific question then. Should there be an absence of that with China, given the concerns in not just the national security space, but around their trade behavior as well?
To the broader trade agreement?
Yeah, like should basically, you're saying that where not possible, we should go sector by sector. My question is, on principle, should that be our approach to China? Should we be avoiding a comprehensive free trade agreement given the patterns of behavior economically?
Well, I think that is our approach, and I think the federal government has indicated that to whether it be the American president or others, that we are not looking for a broad-based free trade agreement with Canada. It's a different environment, with China. It's a different environment than maybe negotiating with a country like the United States of America, certainly, who has traditionally been an ally despite more recent challenges that we've had in our relationship, or even a country like India, where I think the goal of a broad-based trade agreement is certainly within the realm of possibility. And in the meantime, maybe we have to take some of these sector-by-sector agreements, memorandum of understandings, what they might be, in order to advance to that.
Do you have any assurances, based on, you've made 2 trips recently to China, do you have any assurances from China that they won't repeat the next time they're mad, for example, about some geopolitical stance that Canada is taking or some trade decision Canada has made, that they won't repeat the behavior they did last year and in 2018 and leverage the vulnerability that canola sector has on China as an export market and hit them again hard? They've
done it numerous times. I think 3 times in my time in this position, and so we as a province have often had to be able to use our relationships to work through whatever those trade irritants might be from time to time. This most recent time, they were much deeper with 100% tariff as opposed to something much more minor, and they're much more broad across the spectrum of products that they covered. So this was a much more significant reaction that China had than what we saw in 2018 or back, I think, in 2014-15 was the time previous to that. So as trade relations evolve, you're going to see these types of things, and I think the how we deal with that is we're part of the conversation, and we're not pushing away from the table. We're always at the table in the the good times and maybe more important to be at that table, having those negotiations in the challenging times. Yes, with countries like China, India, and others. And if we're truly serious about determining our own destiny as Canadians, diversifying our economy as Canadians, we don't have the ability to, broadly pick and choose who we're going to deal with. There's some, obviously, countries that are going to have red lines, but we need to be engaging in virtually all countries where we can have that economic relationship.
Respectfully, though, Premier, should there be more caution in deepening a relationship with a country that has exercised the kind of behavior that you just described? Like, if I'm someone involved in the canola sector, like, am I not worried about the propensity of this trading partner to do it again?
We've been trading with them for literally decades now, and this is not deepening that trade relationship. However, I would say there's some opportunities to do that. There is opportunities to do that, and we should be looking at that on an individual basis if we can do it, and it's beneficial to Canada. What this is a restoration of agricultural trade that we have literally had a trade relationship from Saskatchewan's perspective and Canada's perspective with China for decades now. And so that's what this is. But we do have to be careful when we start to potentially expand some of that trade. But we also have to not shy away from those discussions, whether it be with China or whether it be with us as Canadians, if we're serious about determining our own destiny, expanding our economic opportunities, and diversifying our trade around the world. China is one of the largest markets and economies in the world, and if you are truly committed to diversifying our trade, you have to be at the table having those discussions, and we have been the last while.
The agreement as it was eventually instigated a reaction from the U.S. president that was different from the initial reaction, where he then started threatening 100% tariffs on everything Canada sends to the United States. The Prime Minister, when he was in Beijing, you were sitting, I think, just a couple of people away from, maybe even right next to him. At one point, kind of remarked about how the progress we have made, he said, in the partnership with China, as he referenced in that meeting, with the highest levels of the Chinese Communist Party, sets us up well for the new world order. Did you agree with that assessment? That's
not a statement I would use, but in saying, because it's interpreted in many different ways by many different people. However, I would say this: when you look at the trade flux, the uncertainty that we have in that those trading relationships around the world, including China, including the U.S., including we have tariffs from India that are on Canadian products right now. There very much is a change in how trade relationships, trade agreements are coming together, and I explained that earlier with respect to the broader multi-sector trade agreements are maybe not be entirely a thing of the past, but may not be as achievable as they were just a few years ago. And so how we approach trade, how we engage with countries, it's different in each country, but we need to be there as Canadians if we're truly serious about expanding our economic opportunities, diversifying where those products are going, where we're trading around the world. And I would say that I see a federal government that is making that a priority. Minister Hodgson today is in India at an energy summit. That's good. That's where our energy minister, our national energy minister, should be.
Do you reject the idea, to be clear to Canadians watching now, of a so-called New World Order that China is leading?
That New World Order is not in any way something that I would have used in that term. I believe there's another opportunity for us as Canadians to engage from a trade perspective, as opposed to getting into broader discussions about who is the superpower when it comes to leading the world, whether it be in governance systems or what that might be. And so I think that's why those terms would not be used by me, is because there are multiple definitions and interpretations that people are going to dive into on that. The fact of the matter is, and Saskatchewan's position has always been one of, let's engage on a trade basis, whether it be with China, India, the United States of America. The United States of America, I would say, has been somewhat different with our relationship that goes beyond trade. They're our neighbor, they're our longstanding ally, despite significant challenges more recently. But with many of the other markets around the world, our focus is, how do we trade with you, and how do we advance our Saskatchewan, which is a part of the Canadian economy.
I'll leave it on that note. Premier, I appreciate your time as always. Thank you very much.
Take care, Bessie.
That's Saskatchewan's Premier Scott Moe. Coming up, our front bench will be here to talk about all the politics around this premiers meeting, in particular a meeting that took place between Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith and BC's Premier David Eby alongside the Prime Minister. There they are there. Will it overcome the impasse around a pipeline to the West Coast? Sharon Carr, Jamie Ellerton, Sebastian Skamsky, and Laura D'Angelo. There they are. They're back with me in just 2 minutes. Stay right there.
These are two of the leaders bringing our economy together at this crucial time. Two of the leaders in terms of expanding our markets. I think of Premier Eby's recent trip to India, Premier Smith. Most places I go, you've just been.
Alberta is our #1 trading partner in Confederation, and building that trade, supporting each other, finding a path forward is crucial.
We also have so much common ground on developing LNG, ammonia, expansion of the Trans Mountain Pipeline, and also interties nuclear and getting an integrated electricity market. So we don't always agree on everything, but I think we've got a really solid base to start on.
Prime Minister Mark Carney attempting to sort of broker peace on Parliament Hill today. He met with both Alberta Premier Danielle Smith and British Columbia Premier David Eby to talk trade and major projects. The two premiers have clashed on pipelines after the federal government pledged to prioritize an Alberta bitumen pipeline to the Pacific in an MOU signed back in November, to the dismay of Premier Eby. It led to a significant war of words, with Eby calling it not a real project with no private sector proponent, while Smith previously characterized Eby's opposition as un-Canadian. Here's Premier Eby after that meeting.
The tone was very civil in the meeting and borderline friendly. I've been very clear with Premier Smith and with the Prime Minister that I believe that the tanker ban off the coast of British Columbia is there for a reason. I've made it clear to the Prime Minister and to Premier Smith that the process was backwards. We should have all been at the table at the beginning. British Columbia was not. I think that was very unfortunate. But we have to move on. You know, Alberta is an important relationship for British Columbia. Relationship with the federal government is crucial. And so we're going to respect our differences on this file and try to find ways to work forward together.
How likely is it that the premiers can come closer to some sort of agreement on that pipeline after this two-day huddle? Let's bring in our front bench. Sharon Carr is a CTV News political analyst and former Deputy Chief of Staff to former Finance Minister Bill Morneau. Jamie Ellerton is the principal at Kanaptis and worked for Minister Jason Kenney during the Harper government. Next to him, that's Sebastian Skamsky. He was former Director of Media Relations to Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. And with me here in studio is Laura D'Angelo. She's with Enterprise Canada and previously worked in Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's office. Hi, everybody. Happy Wednesday. Sharon, I'll start with you. I can't think of how many times we've heard these two premiers talk at each other, to each other, about each other on this file. This rhetoric, particularly that last clip from Premier Eby, is like a total, it feels like a 178 away from what we've heard before. What do you think's going on?
Well, I never thought I would heard a premier say that it was borderline friendly.
That's my favorite line.
I got to say, the tone and tenor is a lot better than what we had seen a few weeks ago, and I think the tension is natural considering Alberta and BC's difference of opinion here. I think Prime Minister Carney is doing what he has to do as the leader of the Federation, is bring them together. Even Danielle Smith, her approach and how she spoke, and that was friendlier than what we would have expected given the two having a disagreement. But listen, again, we have this situation where we've got a U.S. trading partner who is not reliable, and we need to work better together amongst provinces. So we need Alberta and BC to work together. There are always going to be differences there, but there's going to have to be a way to find a bridge. And I think that's what Carney was trying to do today.
It does feel like when they're all together in the room, Jamie, the rhetoric is very different than when they're reacting to things separately that might not, in their view, be to the interests of, in line with the interests of their provinces. Do you see that changing in a tangible way at all? Because I think it's one thing to say, well, this is just one irritant. It's another thing when that pipeline gets put before, the federal government and they make a decision, let's say, to approve it, to say the same thing.
Yeah, it looks like Prime Minister Carney's first ministers' meeting was, use an old term, a worthwhile Canadian initiative. I think the fact that you have Premier Eby and Premier Smith talking constructively, that kind of photo op, of course, is always a bit theater. It's where everyone gets to go and get the photo for the papers and the evening news and get their clip across to their respective regional markets. But the real substance after the fact, I think, was probably the most encouraging to it. I think when you listen to what's happening right now, we recognize that we're living in a very turbulent times, and there's a pretty broad cross-partisan consensus for that. And then when you come back to the BC specifically, you look at the poll numbers right now, these aren't things that are like volatile. Canadians are resoundingly in favor of expanding access to markets for pretty much all Canadian products and goods, and that includes Canadian energy. And so although the historical pipeline politics that really drove so much of what went on in the Federation from 2010 to 2020 into 2025, all of that changed last year. And I think what you're seeing is Premier Eby see the writing of the wall, look at the real politique of this, and is going to find ways to ensure that the concerns of like progressives who are kind of anti-development across the board are heard. So this is done in the most responsible way, and probably extract a few concessions that'll benefit his province explicitly in a way that's not just GDP numbers, but at the same time get out of the way. And I think one of the things that Carney is doing quite effectively is giving each premier across the country a way to save face and get something that they want to advance their provincial agenda while keeping the national interest moving in the right direction.
Do you think that's the way it shakes down? It all sounds like very much like it would make sense, Laura. The only thing is a lot of the things that Jamie just put forward were things that existed 2 months ago when Premier Eby was like very upset at the prospect of this even being discussed.
They did, and something that struck me in what Jamie was saying was that last little bit. The Prime Minister is so far showing himself to be actually quite an adept operator around this First Minister's table. He's really showing his, small p politics here. He seems to be very good, at least when they all come together, at bringing the premiers together, bringing them along, and making them feel like they are an essential part of this process, which they obviously are. But that seems to be what changes. And it keeps striking me, it sounds so silly, but it keeps striking me that it's like any relationship, right? When it's just over text or you're just hearing about it from your friends, you feel terrible about it, everyone gets mad, you make up the stories and the angles in your head and you talk it to death. And we're hearing the results of that, and then you all get together and sit down and have a conversation, and all of the sudden things move along and they feel different. And that certainly seems like what happened today, which sounds very basic, but also could just be true, right? It seems like Eby is understanding all of the sudden, to Jamie's point, pipeline politics have changed. We're in a trade war. Everything has shifted, and so all of the sudden, other things are going to have to change. And maybe there's going to be big things on the table that Premier Eby wants that the Prime Minister is all of a sudden going to be open to if he can find a new rhetoric around a pipeline.
I suppose like the ultimate proof, Sebastian, will be in when all of this materializes, what happens then? Because we still are kind of talking about it in the ether, but like there's no actual proposal that Alberta submitted yet. They say that's going to happen in June.
Exactly, Vashi. I mean, the proof will be in the pipeline, so to speak. I think, look, it's encouraging to see Prime Minister Carney is moonlighting as a therapist between the premiers providing such apt counseling. But I think it's important to remind Canadians and your viewers that there's one person in that room that holds all the cards, and that person is Prime Minister Carney. He's the one who has the sole jurisdiction to push through projects like this. British North America Act, I believe it's Section 92 that permits him to do this. So while I appreciate that we're reconciling the feelings of Premier Eby and Premier Smith, and obviously they represent two different constituencies that should be heard, the ball is really firmly in Prime Minister Carney's court, and it's time for him to actually go through with this, get out of the way in many instances, and in many of the regulations that remain in place that prevent these projects from being built, ironically, and proceed. So let's see when that actually happens. I hope for the sake of Canadians that it's sooner than later.
Yeah, he said in the House that the putt yesterday, it was interesting because that was the line from Mr. Poilievre, right? Like this whole fight over who should get out of the way. In the response from the Prime Minister was that the MOU would build a pipeline to the West Coast. So we shall see. I will see about taking a quick commercial break. The entire front bench is sticking around. We're going to turn our attention to the big vote happening in Calgary just a few days from now. In fact, we've got the Conservative premiers of the country weighing in on the leadership vote. Pierre Poilievre will face some MPs as well on Parliament Hill. And of course, you're going to want to stay tuned for what the front bench has to say.
I'm really focused on Ontario. We're having our convention the same time they are. Good luck at the federal Conservative convention, but that's going to be up to them to determine if they want to move forward with Pierre Poilievre.
It's not something that I've been focused on. I mean, I won't be attending the convention. I'm not a member of the federal party, so I've kind of been focused on my Nova Scotia priorities.
We're in an environment that is, very much politically charged, not just within our provinces or our nation, but, I think we're seeing that in fairness around the world. And so I don't know if the number will be as high as what, traditionally leaders have expected or received, but I think you'll see a strong, my view would be you'd see a strong mandate.
Three Conservative premiers there weighing in on Pierre Poilievre's upcoming leadership review and whether he'll get the votes required to stay on as leader of the federal Conservative Party. That was the provincial side of things. CTV producers right here in our bureau also asked federal members of Parliament whether they think Mr. Poilievre will get enough votes to stay on as leader and if he should remain in the role.
Whether Mr. Poilievre survives the vote this week? Thoughts on whether Mr. Poilievre survives the vote this weekend?
Oh, I would say definitely.
And should he stay on afterwards?
I sure hope so.
Thoughts on whether Mr. Poilievre survives the vote this weekend?
He will.
And should he stay on afterwards as leader?
He will.
Poilievre this weekend, does he survive the vote?
Well, he's the leader of the Conservative Party, so the number will decide.
Any thoughts from the opposition side of the bench?
No, I have no thoughts.
Oh, I might have some thinking about that, but none that I will share with you.
And would you care to share if you think that he will win?
That's part of what I will not tell you.
The front bench is back to look ahead to that vote. We've got Sharon Card, Laura D'Angelo, Sebastian Skamsky, and Jamie Ellerton assembled. Jamie, I'll start with you. As you look ahead, first of all, let's start with a bit of your reaction to the premiers there and how they characterize the upcoming vote and your thoughts as you look ahead to that vote as well.
Yeah, I don't think there's any real surprise in what you heard from Premier Ford or Premier Houston there. That rift with the federal party has been quite pronounced in public for quite some time. I think the more circumspect and response from Premier Moe is probably what stands out most, and I think kind of shows the challenges as to where the federal Conservative Party is today. There are a lot of people who are seeing real updates on the economy. I think of canola farmers in Saskatchewan specifically when I think of Premier Moe, and they're seeing some kind of results. And so I think the enthusiasm for federal Conservative politics right now is taking a bit of a backseat to the practical realities of the times we're living through.
How much, Laura, is this vote about a kind of the party feeling like the leader represents them versus his ability to fight off the Liberals in the next general election? Like generally, when you look at parties and when they hold these kinds of leadership votes, what do you think will be top of mind?
Right now, I mean, I'm not a Conservative, but I think what is shocker. I think what is probably top of mind is party stability, which I actually think is a little bit different. Because when you look at Pierre Poilievre's personal numbers, he's closer to Max Bernier right now than Mark Carney. There's not a lot of hope for the Conservatives around Pierre Poilievre specifically, but they've also been through a lot of leaders in the past 10 years. And Pierre Poilievre has built quite a machine around himself. There is a lot of organization there. And so my guess is that Conservatives are probably voting more based on party stability and ability to continue to grow that than necessarily around Pierre Poilievre.
So Liberals and journalists and pundits can guess, Sebastian, but you're a Conservative. You tell me, like, what is important to you as you look ahead at that vote? What do you think your fellow party members will be thinking about when they cast their ballot?
I think they'll be thinking about the great gains that we are still to make, that Mr. Poilievre has already made in the last election and that we're looking forward to in the next one. I think they'll look at the recently released, for example, fundraising numbers, where Conservatives continue to blow out the Liberals out of the water when it comes to raising money and making sure that our machine is ready. And I think they'll look to Mr. Poilievre's vision for the country, his message of hope to Canadians, the unity that he will present around especially domestic issues that Mr. Carney is so frequently not present for and doesn't seem to completely understand or be in tune with the average Canadian. So I look forward to seeing Mr. Poilievre's speech. I look forward to seeing the message he charts across, and I know that my fellow delegates will be very eager and keen to cast their ballots in favor for him.
Yeah, some of that fundraising data just came out. Both the Conservative and Liberal parties had record years. The Conservatives raised $48 million last year, Sharon. The Liberals raised $29 million. What does that tell you as you look ahead to the vote, and also about the level of political engagement right now?
Yeah, so listen, I think that the amount of money they've raised is actually impressive. Like, no one can say that that's not a number that we should actually be paying attention to. But I think what folks are going to be looking at is his tone, his tenor, what is he saying? Generally speaking, in the history of campaigns, Liberals have always campaigned kind of based on hope, whereas people like Pierre Poilievre, and not the Conservative Party, but people like Pierre Poilievre campaign on fear. And I think we are going to see some of that come out of what he says, what he does. But again, we're looking at a time when the Liberals are polling higher than the Conservatives are, and what he says there is going to matter. He's definitely brought in a large number of new voters, but not enough to sway people that are center, more left-swinging towards his base. So I think we're going to still see a very interesting, fearful type of message. Liberals are bad. Donald Trump is doing this. Donald Trump is doing that. But how is he going to unite everyone together? I think unity is the one thing that I think he lacks. So I think that's what we're going to want to wait and see.
Jamie, let me ask you about that, because we've talked a bit about this actually both on radio and on TV, but there's a whole bunch of polling out. We spoke to Nick Nanos on the show last night. Leger today has one poll that most significantly shows the Liberals ahead of the Conservatives, but every other poll right now shows a very interesting phenomenon in that Mark Carney's personal numbers, the Prime Minister's personal numbers, far exceed Mr. Poilievre, Pierre Poilievre's, but the parties are actually within, the margin of error of each other in polling. How do you explain that, and what are the implications for Mr. Poilievre there, Jamie?
I think part of, if I had to add another poll to that mix, is when you look at what David Coletto's numbers had to say in terms of the enthusiasm, let's take a step back and remember that the people who are going to be voting in this review process are Conservative Party members who are elected as delegates in their electoral district association and are going to Calgary for this convention. And so I think when you look at the level of enthusiasm that Pierre has brought into the party and how that's manifested itself with those kind of 41% performance and really impressive numbers on the machine stuff that my co-panelist was just talking about, that machine is what's going to be taking a vote in Calgary. And so I think he's going to pass through this convention with flying colors. And I think there's no one actively organizing against Pierre. That's just a fact. And so I think he will be given a chance to lead the party into the next election, whenever that's be. If the Liberals are going to orchestrate something this spring or beyond, all the politics as usual will play that out. And so I think he's going to be given that chance. And so on the one hand, this weekend, he needs to go through the process and rightfully earn his review vote to have that chance. And on another, I think he fundamentally needs to turn the page and start writing Pierre's next chapter. And he can only do that. You're going to have, I think, if he goes down a road of kind of what Sharon just suggested, which I'd be surprised if he does, which is kind of the best hits of what you'd expect from Pierre for the past 5 years, then I don't think he's really writing a new chapter. He's writing a new page on an old chapter. I think he's got to find a way to demonstrate to Canadians, to kind of tap into that hope and substance that says, I get it, we're going to do this together. You saw hints of it in his response to the Davos speech, agreeing on what's best for Canada and the kind of a pan-Canadian consensus there. And the growth as a leader, I think, is ultimately what determines whether or not Pierre wins or succeeds. And ultimately, he's the driver of that.
Laura, I won't ask you in this question what Conservatives think. I'll ask actually what Liberals think, because my perception has been that they're increasingly dismissive of the threat that the Conservatives pose to them, and in particular, Mr. Poilievre poses to them. Do you think that's a fair assessment, and do you think that's smart or not?
It seems like a fair assessment right now that Liberals are a little bit too dismissive of Pierre Poilievre, who, frankly, has proven himself to be a very adept leader and politician, right? Yes, he lost the last election. He also got them over 40%. It isn't a complete failure by any stretch. I don't know that they're going to be forever dismissive. I think they are dismissive in this moment because right now there is no election, and the biggest thing on Pierre Poilievre's mind is leadership. I don't think that will hold at the end of this weekend, and I think all of a sudden we will start to see the Liberals being a little bit more aggressive, or at least targeted in their communications and the policy they're putting out to counteract some of the things that Pierre Poilievre is really good at. For example, affordability and cost of living, which we're already seeing this week, crime, many things that we know are his bread and butter. I think all of a sudden we're going to see the Liberals shift.
I have 1 minute each for Sebastian and a minute for Sharon as well. Sebastian, is I'm sure you enjoy the conversation as lots of Conservative supporters do about, like, what's the pivot? What happens next? But what does happen after this leadership review, in your view? Like, what does Mr. Poilievre need to do?
Well, I think he's going to continue fighting for, I think, the everyday challenges that Canadians face. He has a very unique ability amongst, I would say, every leader right now on the federal scene in actually being able to connect and understand those challenges firsthand through a lived experience. And he's going to continue to be their champion. I think, us in the pundit class, the media kind of elites are not really getting the fact that a lot of people are struggling and they're suffering, and that it's not an easy ride for the average Canadian. And so he's going to continue to speak to that and be their champion and be their voice of hope.
I think if I understand that right, and what I've heard from others, it's I would never take away from Sharon the fact that there are a lot of people that definitely are suffering and that certainly feel that's an integral part to their experience right now. What I keep hearing is what you describe as sort of negativity or a lack of hopelessness is meant to be a reflection of that reality. And that resonates with people. Maybe not as many people as, for example, the message you talk about the Liberals delivering, but it resonates with millions of Canadians, in fact, who voted for them.
It absolutely does. And I think that is something Pierre Poilievre has been very good at, is communicating and getting that message across to people. The issue is sometimes it doesn't come up with a solution. It's really easy to fear and use your message to have fear in it to get people riled up. But you also need to have a leader that people can have confidence in when you're dealing with global trade wars, because that all comes down to affordability. And I don't think Pierre Poilievre is able to do that. He talks a lot still about the carbon tax. He has been unable to pivot to actually talk about what affordability will look like. But that being said, he is an excellent communicator when it comes down to getting to the nitty-gritty of what impacts people in a day-to-day in their lives. I just don't think that is enough to give the Canadian public as a whole the confidence to have someone like him as a leader of the country.
Okay, I will leave it there. Great discussion, guys. Appreciate it very much. Laura D'Angelo, Sharon Carr, Sebastian Skamsky, and Jamie Ellerton, our front bench. I do want to remind you as well of our own special coverage of the Conservative Party's annual convention and Pierre Poilievre's leadership vote. You can tune in Friday starting at 8 o'clock Eastern, 6 o'clock Mountain, right here on CTV News Channel. Plus, we'll have special editions of Power Play live from Calgary, both Thursday and Friday. Coming up tonight on Power Play, the Bank of Canada maintains its key interest rate, with CUSMA hanging in the balance and uncertainty a key feature of the economy. Parliamentary Budget Officer Jason Jakes is here next.
As the Canadian economy continues to adjust to U.S. trade restrictions, we expect the economy to grow modestly and inflation to stay close to our 2% target. However, uncertainty around our forecast is heightened. The range of possible outcomes is wider than usual. U.S. trade policy remains unpredictable, and geopolitical risks are elevated.
Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem there sharing the central bank's economic outlook against the backdrop of a ton of uncertainty, punctuated by CUSMA's review this year. The bank held its key interest rate at 2.25% for a second consecutive meeting, though Macklem warns the bank's efforts to forecast the Canadian economy have grown increasingly difficult given the tariffs imposed by U.S. President Donald Trump. Jason Jakes is the Parliamentary Budget Officer. Hi, Mr. Jakes. Pleasure to welcome you back to studio. Thank you very much for making the time.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for your interest in our work.
For sure. So we just heard from Mr. Macklem, who, of course, was talking about the state of the economy, the risks moving forward. And I thought that was a good jumping off point for some analysis that you've recently done about some of the central promises the federal government is making in order to counter some of the potential investment flight due to that uncertainty. And they have announced through the federal budget, a sizable chunk of spending that they say will spur that investment over time, in particular over the next decade. What is your initial analysis of what that money will or won't do?
So, as you mentioned, Budget 2025 had the headline promise of $1 trillion of capital investment happening over the next 5 years. We took a deep dive into it and we found that the vast majority of that money was actually already announced prior to Budget 2025, so about 85% of it. So while there is new money in Budget 2025 that will stimulate or potentially support additional investment, a lot of that $1 trillion was going to happen anyway, even before Budget 2025. And that ends up being important because, again, as the government's indicated, a central part of their economic policy is to substantially increase investment in the Canadian economy, helping firms and workers kind of turn away from the United States and that export market and reorient themselves to other export markets and potentially more productive activities. So while $1 trillion is nothing to sneeze at, and even $150 billion, 15% of that, still a substantial chunk of change, a lot of that was going to happen anyway.
And so is it fair to say that a lot of that was actually in motion prior to the new government taking the helm?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It was already in motion, and again, even with the $1 trillion, a lot of that ends up being contingent upon other governments, so either provincial governments, municipal governments, but also firms. So companies actually have to come to the table as well and say, you know what, thank you, federal government, for the additional support that you're going to provide to us, either in tax credits or additional subsidies or programs. Yeah, we're going to bet on Canada. Like, we're comfortable building a new factory here, opening up a new mine. And again, these are the types of investments that you need to look out over the next 20 years to figure out whether it's actually going to be worthwhile. And as the governor mentioned today, there continues to be a lot of uncertainty in the economy, especially in the lead up to the CUSMA renegotiation.
In some of those measures that they announced, like could you assess like how unique they are versus, I mean, there's been lots of times where governments try to compel the private sector to bet on Canada. Obviously, the circumstances surrounding this particular ask are different given what's going on with the United States. But I've covered a lot of budgets, and I'm sure you've analyzed a lot of budgets where, capital cost allowances, things like that have been used in order to spur the private sector's investment. Is there something particularly unique about the suite of measures you've seen here?
Based upon what we've looked at thus far, grosso modo, the answer ends up being no. There are some programs or some initiatives that are a little bit different than what we've seen in the past. That said, it does end up kind of looking like simply a different flavor of ice cream at this point. And from our perspective, we end up being fairly prudent as part of our forecasting. Similar, and I'd say similar to the Government of Canada in Budget 2025. Simply because someone says that it's new, it's innovative, what you're going to see is not what has happened in history. Without any evidence or without any proof, it does seem kind of foolhardy to rush out there and say, you know what, it's going to be a spectacular takeoff on the investment side. I certainly hope that's the case, that what happens is not what we've seen in the past, and I guess we'll just wait and see.
Yeah, wait and see is exactly it. Speaking of which, I did want to ask you about something we've touched on in previous conversations, which is the promise, much of which materialized through this budget, to cut on the side of government spending, and in particular, see that through cuts to the public service. It's been really difficult, I would say, to try and ascertain exactly what the level of cuts end up being, and part of that is because of transparency or lack thereof. Other parts are just because it hasn't made its full way through the system and we don't know who's taken what. You, from the beginning, have been anxious to find out, A, what is the true nature of the cut, but B, like, what does that mean for Canadians and the services that they expect from the government? Where are you in finding answers on those two questions?
So I could say that based upon the information that we requested and that we received from most government departments and agencies, there are still three government departments that have declined to share the detailed information with us, Canada Revenue Agency being one of them, which is a big one. But based upon the information that we've received, we're in a good position to have a sense of the plan that's in place from the government at a detailed level. So something the government hasn't released yet are which programs across the government of Canada are actually going to feel the brunt of spending reductions and layoffs. And that's something that we can now look at internally, and we're going to be sharing some of that information with a parliamentary committee in the coming weeks. We can now identify those, and we can now see those elements. On the service side, it's a little bit less clear. And I can say that for the vast majority of responses we've received, the departments have indicated that there should be low or limited service level impacts felt as a result of the cuts. So it remains to be an open question regarding how one cuts $44 billion over the next 5 years and lays off 16,000 public servants with low or limited impacts. But that's obviously something that Parliament will want to look into.
Have they provided any details to you about how they arrived at that conclusion? And on instinct, does it seem hard to square the circle?
Well, on our end, we only asked for their assessment of what the service level impacts would be. So we didn't ask them for their underlying plans around the service level impacts. And I would say, again, we requested the data not to get it into the guts of, okay, what's going to happen to food safety in Canada. We were more focused on, based upon the government's overall fiscal management, does this make sense? Because the government is planning on cutting $60 billion over the next 5 years in federal spending and spending it elsewhere. And so we need to figure out, is there a plan in place? Can this actually be executed? And if it can't be executed, what are the consequences for the government actually respecting its overall fiscal anchors or its fiscal management approach?
Can it be executed?
We will find out.
But based on the numbers that they provided to you?
Based upon the numbers, we have an add up for a good part of the plan at this point. Again, I mentioned the Canada Revenue Agency, Parks Canada, Library and Archives somehow all declined to provide information to us. But we have about 80% of a plan at this point, which again is, I would say it's reassuring. There's a plan in place. A separate question, and the one that you started with, and you alluded to, is one of transparency. So while we have the information, and there's certainly a large stack of papers in both official languages sitting in the President of the Treasury Board's office at this point in the government, none of it's been made public in a comprehensive way. So while information has been leaking out to the public, the government has yet to actually table some sort of official document indicating what the detailed plans are.
Okay, I'm going to leave it on that note. Mr. Jakes, thank you as always. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Jason Jakes is the Parliamentary Budget Officer. I'll take a quick break. We've got more Power Play on the other end of that break.
What we have built into our projection is that tariffs that are currently in place remain in place. So what that means is that the tariffs on the hard-hit sector stay, the CUSMA exemptions for everything else remain in place. That could change with the review. The other thing we have in our projection is, the uncertainty is already having an impact on the economy. That's built into our projection. We have that gradually diminishing over time.
That is Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem talking about the big X factor in the economy right now, uncertainty surrounding trade with the United States, something that the CUSMA review will likely add to before some kind of resolution is arrived at. That theme also underpinning, of course, the meeting between premiers taking place tonight. They'll be having dinner, I should say, with Prime Minister Carney, and then tomorrow all of them will meet again with the Prime Minister in a more formal capacity. We'll have coverage throughout. I'll leave Power Play there. I'm Vashi Capellos. Thanks so much for watching. Have a wonderful evening.